Hello viewers, welcome back to Daily Retro. Today we're going to be doing a little overview of the Analogue Pocket dock. So this was something that I received quite recently. You can see I've got two dongles in it. It's for my 8BitDo arcade sticks. But you can see the inputs on the back there. So it's got a USB-C for power, HDMI for obviously screen output, and then two USB ports for your controllers. So there's a compatibility list which I'll link down below for controllers that are known to be working. It's worth noting that even though Analogue say that the 8BitDo arcade sticks only work with Bluetooth, and yes they do work with Bluetooth, I have tested that, they do work with 2.4 GHz with the dongle, which is why you see the dongle in my dock obviously. This is only accomplished by doing a firmware update of both the dock and the obviously arcade stick, but I think the arcade stick was sort of the main thing you had to do, and I think the dock, it may or may not have worked without the firmware update, but it's worth doing anyway just to so you get some better support and compatibility. But without further ado, we're going to get into a little guide of how you can make the most of your Analogue Pocket dock. It's honestly been a life changer since I've got it. It's transformed the Analogue Pocket into something that's a very fun handheld into something that's just an FPGA beast for things like arcade, which is something I've not been able to sort of get a good experience at home before. I've always been a bit disappointed by things like the Raspberry Pi when it comes to emulating arcade, but I can safely say that the FPGA chip in the Pocket via the dock is very, very good, and I've been massively enjoying it, which is why I want to share my experiences and how you can get into playing mainly the arcade stuff on it, but also other things as well. So without further ado, we'll get into a little download / installation video on what you've got to do to set up your micro SD card for your Analogue Pocket to play the arcade cores as well as other cores as well. The first thing you're going to want to do is download the Pocket Updater software. So the link for this will be down in the description, but it's available on GitHub, and obviously for Windows it comes as exe file, and then you need to extract it to a folder of choice as seen in here, and then you're able to access it via PowerShell and basically run it. So when you run it, you're going to want to run it as administrator. You can see here I'm copying the path that the file is in and then changing directory in administrative PowerShell to get to it, and then I'm able to do the command to actually, which is /pocket updater, and then these commands on the end which point to the E drive, which is where my Pocket is actually mounted at the moment. So this is the micro SD card. It's easy to find out if you just open my computer, that will say what drive letter you've got against it, and then once you run that, it's going to open the tool as you can see here, and then you can choose from the options to update all. So I've done all of my updates prior to this, so it's only doing a few little additions, so it's much quicker, but for you it's probably for the first time going to take a few minutes, so do bear with it on the first time you run it. And then as you can see, the files are outputted to the E drive, which is your Pocket micro SD card, and then you want to safely eject it so that you can eject it out of your computer and put it into your Analogue Pocket. This is now a screen record of my Analogue Pocket dock's output. I was last playing Gallagher core, which is an arcade core, so all that update all basically gave me a ton of arcade cores. A core is essentially a piece of, I want to say software, but it's quite different for FPGA, but we'll call it software for today. So that's basically what was a piece of hardware that just ran a particular game. And you'll see below that was arcade multi-systems, which were arcade pieces of hardware that ran several different games. The Capcom CPS-1 is most famous for Street Fighter 2, which I'll get onto a little bit later, but that will be the most popular title that you may have heard of. The cores are always getting added to by the updater tool that I linked down below, so it's worth doing the update every so often as well. So if we go back a couple of screens, you'll see all the sort of sections that you can go into. Obviously there is a console section as well. I've added a load of my own ROMs to the 2600, as well as a few others like the SNES and the NES. But yeah, it's really cool to be able to add your own console ROMs as well and be able to play console games. So all of these consoles you see here are supportable by a lot of games. So I've not found any compatibility issues yet. But again, these cores for the consoles are always being updated. So it's really cool to see the community improving these cores. If we go back again outside of the console area and back into arcade, we're going to go into Donkey Kong Core. So this was basically a piece of hardware that only ran Donkey Kong, and I'm going to run it, and I'm just going to do a little playthrough. Little caveat, I've not really played in quite a while. I used to be actually fairly decent at Donkey Kong, but for whatever reason it keeps kicking my ass at the moment. I used to be able to get to at least level sort of 6 or 7, but on this particular playthrough that I was recording, the pressure was on and I couldn't even beat the first level. But I'm just going to leave this playing for you guys so you can see sort of how realistic it is compared to what it was on the original arcade. Donkey Kong there pretty much kicked my ass, but it was fun nonetheless. So it's worth noting that the select button on your arcade stick is generally the credit button, and start obviously starts most games. But if you press the Analogue Pocket button, which is the blue button on the arcade stick, then it opens this menu, which you're able to see core settings and power off the console. A lot of the arcade cores don't support sleeping the Pocket yet. This may come in a future update, but if you were to power off and then power back on, you would go into the sort of menu before you boot up the core that you last played, which I'm going to show for you now. You can see we've powered the dock back on and we're straight back into the opening screen of the Donkey Kong core. And then if we go back, we can go and look at our controller settings. So for the 8BitDo arcade stick, it's a bit odd. So it's coming up as a wired USB pad, as I've only got one as a USB dongle plugged in at the moment. So as I may have mentioned before in a previous video, you can update the arcade sticks to work with 2.4 GHz, but they also work with Bluetooth. As you can see there, it's got the Bluetooth logo. I found this a bit odd because I was actually using both via 2.4 GHz. There is a physical switch on the arcade stick to change that, but for whatever reason it seems to pick it up as, or show the logo for Bluetooth. Don't be too disconcerted by this. It's, as long as you can see that two controllers are connected, then it's definitely working. As you can see here, you can go into the settings of each controller and choose to disconnect it or forget it entirely if you choose to prioritize other controllers. But now I'm just going to take you through a quick sort of overview of how you can change the settings per core when it comes to controls. So for this example, we're going to go into Arcade Multisystem and the CPS 1 and go into Street Fighter 2. So here we are at the title screen of Street Fighter 2 Arcade. So you can see you need to press select, which is basically adding a credit to the game. But if you open up the analog settings with your button, which will be the blue button on the arcade stick, you can then go into the controls and then you can map your buttons to what you prefer to use. So obviously you can see light punch, medium punch, special punch, and the same for kicks, and you can choose to remap all these settings. Don't pay too much attention to what it actually says is actually mapped. As long as you've sort of remember the buttons, then don't worry too much. It's purely because the Pocket does not know exactly what controller you're using. So I hope you've enjoyed that little installation / little playthrough. So it's worth mentioning a couple things. If you are going to play on the 8BitDo arcade sticks, which I do highly recommend for playing anything arcade on this device. So the blue button on the arcade sticks is basically equivalent to the analog main menu button, which is sort of right at the bottom of the console in the middle. This button is for sort of opening the menus, as you previously saw, and that's also like a wake function as well. So after you turn your 8BitDo controller to the on position, which is X mode only, you will obviously see, I don't know if you can see the flashing lights in that, but anyway, so when you turn that on and then press the blue button, it will wake your analog Pocket docked, even if the console is actually off. It doesn't just only do it if it's in sleep mode, it is also if it's off, as long as the dock is plugged in. And that leads me on to some other things to note. So the dock, it requires 1.5 amps minimum. So if you are looking for a power supply, especially in the UK, in the US it obviously comes with its own power supply, but in the UK or Europe it's worth noting that you'll probably want to have a 2.1 amp power supply or more. It does come with a USB-C to USB-C official analog cable, and what I did was basically just get an old unused phone charger, which is just a single USB-C power adapter basically, and this outputs up to 2.5 amps, so obviously it's not even using the maximum, but it's worth noting that you will see a lot of issues if you've not got the minimum power going into the dock, especially if you're playing these arcade cores that potentially do need more power than the device would need for, say, playing an original Game Boy game. So if you've got any questions on this whole process, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. I believe it's actually one of the simplest ways to get into FPGA arcade gaming, which obviously is absolutely fantastic for the community. Obviously the Mister has been around for a number of years now, but it's quite a sort of, it's not, if you're IT sort of minded like myself, it's not too difficult to get into, but for people who don't have that knowledge, I would say the Analogue Pocket is the easiest route to go down to get into this side of things. And it honestly is night and day from playing a system like this in arcade mode compared to, say, a Raspberry Pi doing software emulation, playing arcade titles with what seems like an eternity worth of lag. It just seems like there's next to no latency on these, even though they are wireless via 2.4 gigahertz. So really impressed with the whole setup and how easy it was to get going. I know for a fact that a lot of products that get released, they were always like, just do this firmware update, and then people have issues doing that. But I found the whole process very easy, and hopefully you guys do too. But if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you very soon for another video. Cheers.